Hello and welcome to Tech Deals. Game performance time on the Acer Aspire VX15 $1,000 laptop computer. Full playlist of videos on this computer linked in the video description below. Here you can see the specs on this machine. It is an awesome deal for $1,000. This video was captured with an Elgato HD60 Pro hardware capture card, MSI Afterburner used for the real-time numbers in the upper left, and Fraps used for the minimum, maximum, and average game performance numbers you'll see at the end of this video. Now, a full review on this computer, as well as Windows performance and first boot Windows update, are all linked in the video description below. This video is all about game performance. How well does this laptop game at 1080p? And as you can see here in Overwatch, it does very, very well. Now in this video, we're going to be taking a look at 3 different games. Overwatch first in the most detail, followed up by World of Tanks, and then finally Farcry Primal. We are playing Overwatch today at 1080p Full HD resolution at high detail preset. If you look at the numbers in green at the top left corner of the screen, you'll see we're doing nearly 80 frames per second. Our graphics card is used less than 100% because, believe it or not, at these detail settings at 1080p, you don't need more than a 1050 Ti in order to play Overwatch. We could absolutely have this game at Ultra. I simply set it to high because it's a consistent testing point. Most of the games that I'm going to show you on this laptop were done at high detail. Usually there's an ultra or a maximum detail setting that you can go above that, but frankly, high is a good setting to expect a 1050 Ti to run at. When you look at the numbers at the top left corner, keep in mind that that first percentage you're looking at, 77, 78%, it's down to 71 as I say this, that is the percentage of the compute power of the graphics chip that's being used. That means there's actually power in reserve. Now you might be saying, well, why isn't the frame rate running faster? Well, that's the CPU. This is a $1,000 laptop and it comes in several different trims. I've been asked repeatedly in the comment section, why don't I recommend the $800 version of this laptop? And this right here is why. The CPU in this laptop is an i7 processor. It's not the i7 part that makes a difference, it's the clock speed that makes a difference. There is an $800 version of this laptop linked in the video description below with the i5 chip. Would the extra threads of the i7 make this game run faster? No, but the clock speed does. The clock speed of the i7 is up to 500 megahertz faster than the clock speed of the i5. I say up to because the turbo speeds do vary depending upon how many cores are being used and the thermal conditions, but there is a clock speed advantage to the i7, and that's what's enabling higher performance. This same graphics chip on the i5 would produce less performance because we are actually CPU limited, not GPU limited. You're always going to be limited by something, either the game's engine or your graphics card or your CPU. Something is preventing performance ultimately from running faster, and in this case, it's actually the processor, not the graphics chip. Now, if you come down to the third line, the i7 7700 line, you'll see that our CPU is loafing along at 32 to 35%. Wait a minute, you say, our CPU is clearly not limiting. It's not at 100%. Actually, it is for what this game will use, and this is a very important point to understand when you look at CPU percentage usage numbers. This is a 4-core, 8-thread processor. The only time you will ever see that processor at 100% is if you are running programs, applications, games, etc. that will use 8 threads. There's virtually no games on the market today that will. Battlefield 1 is one exception. There are a handful of others. Generally, most games use between 2 to 4 cores. If you're using 4 cores, you'll be at 50% usage, assuming the CPU is maxed out. If you're at 25%, then you're using 2 cores, because 2 out of 8 is 25%. Now, this is assuming that the CPU is fully busy. If the graphics chip were at 100% and the CPU were here, then we might be graphics chip limited rather than CPU limited. So it's important to make the distinction that this only really counts when the graphics card is not the limitation to further performance. Now, having said that, let's move on to the World of Tanks gameplay. Here you're going to see something a bit different. Take a look at our GPU usage. Now here, instead of high detail, I have it at maximum detail. Why? Because frankly, World of Tanks, even the HD client runs fine on a 1050 Ti. You absolutely don't need more than this to play this at beautiful frame rates. Take a look at our frame rate. We're nearly 100 frames per second, and you will notice that our graphics chip is at 98% usage. That simply means that the limitation to further frame rate is our graphics chip, not our CPU. This game will happily run at 120 frames per second if you have more graphics card. Do you need 120 frames per second? Most laptops are going to have a 60 Hz panel, and so anything over 60 frames per second is not displayed anyway. There are laptops, please note, with 120 Hz displays, but they cost a lot more than this does. So while you're currently looking at 115 frames per second now, the actual laptop panel won't display it anyway. Turn VSync on and you'll be stuck at 60 frames per second, even at maximum detail. In fact, here you can see we've run into an engine limitation because 120 frames per second is about the most World of Tanks will run. You will notice that there it is. There's 77%, 91, 80. So when you see that graphics chip come down, that means we've run into an engine limitation or a CPU limitation. World of Tanks really only uses 2 cores, which is why you see our CPU usage at 25%. Speaking of CPU, let me draw your attention to the temperature of the CPU. Yes, it's very warm. This is a laptop computer, and it is a relatively budget gaming laptop computer. I realize that $1,000 in a budget may not always coincide with each other. You may hear, $1,000 in budget? Well, yes, because you can easily spend $2,000 on a laptop. I will tell you I did not run into thermal throttling issues. You do hear the fan on this, and if you're going to be gaming, I do recommend a nice set of headphones, and then you won't hear the fan, because you will hear the exhaust fan on this when it's gaming. You'll notice that our graphics chip is actually quite a bit cooler than our CPU is. System RAM, now this system comes with 16 gigs of RAM, which is plenty for every game you would ever play on it. There's no need to upgrade it. And our VRAM is also not a limitation. This graphics chip has plenty of power to utilize 2 gigabytes and in some cases 4 gigabytes. You will never need more than 4 gigs of VRAM on a 1080 Ti graphics chip. Speaking of the 1080 Ti, I mentioned before that there are 3 different models of this laptop. Actually, there's more than that, but there's 3 I have covered or reviewed. The one that I'm actually testing this on, which is $1,000 even, there's an $800 model and there's a $1,300 model. I don't recommend the $800 model. You give up too much to save $200. You get a lower powered 1050 non-TI graphics card. You get the i5 CPU at a lower clock rate, missing 4 threads, and a few other things. This is the deal, but if you want more graphics performance, the $1,300 model has a GTX 1060 instead of the 1050 Ti. What's the difference? 65% more performance. So if this laptop were running at 50 frames per second, you'd be getting about 80 frames per second out of the 1060. You also get a 1 terabyte hard drive on the $1,300 model. Now, a 1 terabyte drive on a laptop is about $60. So 240 of the difference is the graphics chip, and then the rest of it is the fact that it already has a hard drive included. It does give you extra performance for playing modern games, but it does cost $300 more. The $1,300 laptop is completely unnecessary for World of Tanks, Overwatch, and games like this. Battlefield 1, yes, the 1060 is going to make a difference. Mass Effect Andromeda, absolutely. The Division, Ghost Recon Wildlands, those games you're really going to want a 1060 instead of the 1050 Ti. But if you play games like Overwatch and World of Tanks, there's absolutely no need to spend the extra money. This laptop is a deal for $1,000. Now that's enough World of Tanks. How about Farcry Primal? Now Farcry Primal does demand more than a 1050 Ti would normally provide. That's why I'm showing you the detail settings here. We do have the HD textures turned on. We are at high graphics quality detail, and we are running the game's built-in benchmark. Now I personally am not a huge fan of built-in benchmarks. I prefer actual gameplay. That's why when I do stuff like Grand Theft Auto 5, I usually show you the actual game instead of built-in benchmarks. But when I do these 3 game videos, oftentimes the 3rd game will be a built-in benchmark. Why? Time. The time it would take me to play 20 plus games to the level that I would be able to show you something interesting is simply not reasonable or practical. So for some games like Far Cry Primal, which I honestly don't play personally, it's either give you this built-in benchmark or frankly, leave it out entirely. The primary benefit to built-in benchmarks is it gives you a way to compare machine to machine. Not necessarily how well does the game play, but it gives you an idea of how well it compares to maybe your current machine. So if you're having trouble playing Farcry Primal on whatever computer you're playing, run the built-in benchmark and compare it to your machine. And here we are at the results. Overwatch, high detail, average of 72 frames per second, a max of 93, and a low of 58. Completely, totally playable at high detail with no issues whatsoever. We are primarily CPU bound in Overwatch, not graphics, so you would get very similar numbers if you ran it on Ultra instead of high, your choice. World of Tanks plays beautifully with an average of 102 frames per second at maximum detail at 1080p. Even the minimums, even the explosions and the heavy combat sections only got down to 76 frames per second, and that was very, very briefly. It spent the majority of its time above 90 frames per second. Farcry Primal, however, is an entirely different matter. At this frame rate, it's going to be choppy in places. Would I recommend this laptop for Farcry Primal? Not really, certainly not at high detail. Now, I will tell you that I also tried medium, and it didn't make much of a difference. Lowering the detail to minimum did not improve the frame rate dramatically. I did not try low, because frankly, if you have to put it on low, you need more graphics card. Farcry Primal would hugely benefit from the GTX 1060 version of this laptop, the $1,300 version linked in the description below. As I said before, Battlefield 1, Mass Effect Andromeda, Farcry Primal, The Division, those all really need a 1060. Overwatch, World of Tanks, and other such games, the 1050 Ti is plenty. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you loved it. Remember to subscribe to my channel with that big huge red button directly below this video. Questions and comments in the comment section. And as always, remember to check out the links in the video description. The full playlist on this laptop is down there. The link to Amazon.com where you can buy this laptop will be down there. I bought this laptop and so should you. If you are looking for the very best $1,000 gaming laptop on the market today, I love this thing. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.